the number one challenge that industry is faced with today is what we call legacy lawsuits. Unfortunately, our judicial system in Louisiana is one of the worst in the entire country. We're 49th in judges' competency, we're 49th in jury fairness, and I can go on down the list. Consequently, our industry is the target of a lot of lawsuits that we call legacy because they're suing us for things that we did that were legal back in 1910 and 1920 and 1930. So it's a huge problem. And today we're going to have Dr. David Dismukes with the LSU Center for Energy Studies that's going to give a presentation on it and show the economic impact. But it's in the billions of dollars, and a lot of jobs have been lost because of the legal system and climate that we have here in Louisiana.
These are a number of suits that have been filed over the last several years that have assessed environmental penalties and have made lawsuits and very large damage claims against oil and gas operators in South Louisiana, in some instances dating back to the original inception of the lease when it was originally drilled, which in many instances can be decades prior.
What kind of an impact economically has this had on jobs in Louisiana?
Well, on the study that we did, we figured that there was about as much as 1,200 drilling wells that had been lost as a consequence of this activity, probably as much as 6.7 billion in expenditures associated with that activity, maybe as much as 10 billion in economic activity overall when you account for the multiplier impacts of that activity, maybe as much as 30,000 in employment opportunities over about an 8-year period. So certainly a significant impact overall on drilling activity.
How would you characterize the impact of legacy lawsuits on Louisiana?
Well, it's certainly been significant. It's in some years, particularly in 05 and 06 and 07, some of our estimates were that it was as much as about a quarter of the activity. It could have been higher as a consequence of that actual the lawsuit activity.
What about lost tax revenue as a result of legacy lawsuits?
Well, there's certainly a lot of lost tax revenues associated with all that economic activity that I talked about before. We didn't go in and explicitly detail a lot of those tax implications, but I think one of the things that I talk about in the report that is concerned to us, and one of the reasons why we're looking at it, has been the impact that this may have longer run and down the road for our state mineral revenues. As that drilling activity starts to slow down, new wells don't come online, production starts to slow, and mineral revenues as a consequence of that activity start to go down as well. So it's certainly the really motivating factor for having looked at this study to begin with.
Where does Louisiana rank compared to other states in terms of legacy lawsuits?
Well, these are somewhat unique here for Louisiana, particularly in the way that those damages have been assessed.
Would you describe these as frivolous lawsuits and lawsuit abuse?
Absolutely, they are. The vast majority of them are. We have a system in place in Louisiana. Landowner has a complaint against the oil and gas industry, and by no means are we perfect. And if they do, they can go to the Louisiana Office of Conservation and file a complaint. And the Commissioner of Conservation will then send a crew out, take a look at it, and can at that time issue a compliance order to have it cleaned up.
Have there been examples that come to mind of more or less outrageous settlements that were reached in comparison to the actual cost of cleanup?
Oh yeah, the one case that started all of the legacy lawsuit issue was a case called the Cabello case, where the landowner ended up getting close to $73 million on a piece of property that's had a value of $108,000, and the trial lawyers also got out of that about $8 or $9 million. And when you get that kind of settlement for something that merely $108,000 piece of property, then that's like throwing blood into the water, and the sharks start swimming, and there's more and more people looking at enriching themselves on the back of the industry.
Dr. Dismukes' report was very consistent on a macro basis from what we've experienced personally with our company. Not only has it, for our company's standpoint, we were involved in a legacy lawsuit, still are involved in several others, but we were involved in one that really had a dramatic impact on everything that our company was involved in, every decision that we made. There are 126,000 acres of mineral rights that we own in LaSalle and Catahoula Parish, and those rights are outside of, or involved in a legacy lawsuit, and as a result are no longer in commerce. We can't drill on that acreage because it's involved in lawsuits. We can't drill on it because other parties are preventing additional drilling in that area. These are oil areas. This is places where oil production is available, and as a result, we've had to look for projects elsewhere. We've had to take our drilling dollars, instead of spending them in our own backyard and minerals that we own, we've taken them to Texas and drilled in the Permian Basin as a result.
What kind of an impact has it had on jobs with you hiring people from Louisiana for jobs?
Well, for our company, with this lawsuit hanging over our heads, it's significant enough where it impacts our continued viability. So it makes it very difficult for me to hire people personally because I can't promise them that our company is going to be around in the next 12 months to actually hire folks.
What do you think needs to be done?
Well, we need to focus on getting this problem away from plaintiffs' lawyers and look at real solutions. And the best way to do that is to focus on whether or not there's a real problem initially, early on. And if there is, let's address it and focus on cleaning up property and not involving everyone in litigation that goes on for years and years and ultimately doesn't do anything but enrich a bunch of lawyers.
When you see those numbers kind of flashed in front of you, loss of 30,000 jobs, $6.8 billion in lost revenue for the state of Louisiana, it's pretty mind-boggling. But when we were working on this, originally, the primary goal of this was to prevent lawsuits and get the properties cleaned up. So we seem to have lost that focus over the last few years as the law has seemed to have been distorted some, or has not been used as the way it was intended to be used by the legislature when we originally passed this. We tried to model our legislation after something like Texas, where you really went through kind of a regulatory, you solved all the regulatory issues before you actually got into court. So that's the way the law was originally set up, was to go have a regulatory process, which you use people who are knowledgeable about what's going on, and you take some of the sort of passion out of it, and you put some more of reason into the arguments. But what we're seeing now is that the law has not worked as well as we hoped, and it is hurting business in Louisiana. It's hurting jobs in Louisiana, and it's obviously impacting the state's fiscal here. So hopefully something can be done in this legislative session to cure those problems.
This study shows that is a perfect example of how frivolous lawsuits can directly impact jobs and our economy. And in the context of the national recession that we're dealing with, no state can afford to lose 30,000 jobs, and certainly not here in Louisiana.
What would you like to see happen? What needs to be done?
Well, I certainly hope that the lawmakers at the legislature will take a look at this and realize that it's critically important that we address this issue now. We cannot afford to wait and lose more jobs as a result of these frivolous legacy lawsuits.
These are considerable, that the impacts are there, and it's certainly an issue that policy ought to get together and attempt to resolve.